One of the most common misconceptions about Calvinism, both in the past and in our present day, is that it is a cold, lifeless, fatalistic, even mean doctrine and a view that really undercuts and undermines Christian assurance of salvation, as well as growth in godliness and holiness. In my new book, The Grace of Godliness, an Introduction to Doctrine and Piety in the Canons of Dort, I argue that this is simply not the case. In fact, it's the exact opposite. The doctrines of grace actually are the bedrock, or the very foundation on which our growth in holiness and godliness is based. I begin in the book by looking at election and working my way through all the way to perseverance. I argue that with unconditional election, we have the very source of our Christian assurance, as well as humility and growth in holiness. And then with the second of the doctrines of grace, the limited atonement, or sometimes referred to as particular atonement, we have there the cause for personal and corporate worship of our Savior Jesus Christ in light of what He did and accomplished in the cross. And then total depravity and effectual grace, sometimes referred to as irresistible grace. These doctrines are truly the death of pride, and they actually create humility within us and praise to God who alone has saved us. And then finally, the perseverance of the saints, or sometimes referred to as the preservation of the saints. And it's this last one that not only is the foundation of our assurance, but also is an incentive for holy living and growth in godliness and into the image of Jesus Christ. One of the tragedies of our own day, and something that I think we're all guilty of, is living in the present and forgetting about the past. And as Christians, we even do this, and we do this to our own peril. We forget the great theologians and confessions of faith that our faith today is built upon. In this new book, The Grace of Godliness, I take us on a trip back to the 17th century, in which we look at these Dutch Reformed Calvinists who wrote and confessed what today we call the Canons of Dort. Now, we have to keep in mind that there's a context in which these canons were written, and that is, they were responding to some of the objections of the Arminian remonstrances, they were called. And these Arminian remonstrants argued not only against these doctrines of grace, but also that if we were to believe these things, they would undermine the Christian faith and the Christian life. In this book, I argue actually quite the opposite. In other words, by looking at these canons, I show that not only do we find a robust and a strong defense of the doctrines of grace, but there also is an emphasis on how these doctrines actually cultivate and provide us with an incentive for holy living and godliness, humility, Christian assurance, and worship and praise to our sovereign God.